This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you. Welcome back, knockers. It's Hannah.
It's such a weird thing to call people.
Go with it.
This is Veronique Perry's fault. Anyway.
I like it.
Cool. Yeah, welcome, guys.
Who are you?
My name is Madison.
And you're listening to Who's Knocking?
Another true crime podcast.
That's right. And we are back once again with part 3 of our series on Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a.k.a. the Ken and Barbie Killers. So if you haven't listened to the first 2 parts that we did on these very fucked up individuals, check those out. But I'll still give you a quick recap to catch you up.
That's nice of you. I did not give recaps, so she's nicer than me.
Yeah, I feel like I would just forget everything.
I feel like if I'm a listener to something like this, I'm saving up all 4 parts and I'm listening to them one by one. And then I'm skipping the recap. That's just me.
Okay, well.
No, not to say like
skip this recap that I
not
put
to
effort
say,
into or
no. Because I know a lot of people listen to them one by one. So like fair enough.
Yeah, that's what I do actually. But before the very important and useful recap that I did.
Yeah, sorry.
Trigger
that was
warning,
really
you
dickish
guys.
of me.
Yeah. Trigger warning, explicit content, obviously. Like all of
explicit
this is,
sexual content,
yeah,
sexual
violence.
assault, sexual violence, yeah.
So let's get into the recap. Paul and Karla met in Scarborough, Ontario in October of 1987. At the time, Karla was a 17-year-old high school student who loved animals and would go on to work at a vet clinic. And Paul was a 23-year-old narcissist who had been raised in an abusive and dysfunctional household. Did graduate university, though, so I don't know if that's...
I mean...
Does that add points in favor?
Not really.
No,
like,
not really.
anyone can do that these days.
By the time Paul was in his early 20s, he was...
I didn't, though. To be honest.
It's fine, whatever. It's not a metric of success. No. If Paul, Okay, so... But shout out everyone who's graduated from university.
Good for you.
Yeah. By the time that Paul was in his early 20s, he was regularly abusing the women he dated and had developed a fascination with pornography that featured young women being raped and abused in like home films, like amateur films. Love that stuff. And
do you?
Huh? No, he loved that stuff. Not me.
I thought you said love that stuff.
No, he loved that stuff.
It's like that's a lot.
Not me. Don't worry.
It's a lot to be saying here.
No.
Sorry, it's late. I'm very giggly. I'll not be like that.
It's okay.
It's not the time.
It's fine. So prior to meeting Karla, Paul had begun to stalk and violently rape women in his hometown of Scarborough. When the two met, Paul was charmed by Paul and initially interested in participating in a sexual relationship with him, like right away, that were like they were doing like these like BDSM kind of like handcuffs and such. Mm-hmm. So she was interested, at least to a degree, in sadomasochism. At first, Paul showered Karla with gifts and affection, but quickly he became increasingly abusive to her as time went on. During the first few years of their relationship, which was long distance at the time, Paul continued to stalk and rape women, earning him the title of the Scarborough Rapist by the police who were trying to find him. In 1990, Paul became sexually obsessed with Karla's younger sister, Tammy, and Karla agreed to let him rape Tammy while she subdued her sister with sedatives she'd stolen from the vet clinic she worked at.
And really overdid it there.
And it really, never, ever loses, how fucked up that is. Every time I think about it, it's just,
so disturbing.
What the fuck? So... Not only did they rape Tammy, they filmed themselves both participating in raping Tammy, although based on the transcripts of the tapes that they filmed, it appeared that Karla was protesting and unwilling, but still did it. However, Tammy died during the assault. Unknown as far as was it an intentional death or an accidental death. At that point, they were not considered suspects, however, and her death was ruled as an accident. Later that year, at the end of the month, so early February, the two of them moved to a home in Port Dalhousie, St. Catharines, where Paul increasingly verbally, physically, and sexually abused Karla now that he had her isolated. And on at least one occasion, they raped a girl together. This occasion was on tape. She was also 15 years old, and they released her after. June 29th, 1991, they were married at a lavish wedding ceremony, which was the same day that the dismembered body of a young girl that they had killed and disposed of 2 weeks earlier was found. So let's pick up with that part of the case. June 16th, 1991, 2 weeks before their wedding, a 14-year-old girl named Leslie Mahaffey, who will have her photo up, lived in Burlington, Ontario, got home past her curfew and was locked out of her house.
Oh, yes,
How
I remember this.
shitty is this?
I remember my mom talking about this, why she would never lock us out.
Ever. So I don't think she was necessarily... Okay, so she kind of was-ish locked out of the house. There's this whole backstory that I read. Basically, 14-year-old girl, she had been going through some like rebellious phase, so she had lost the rights to have the key to her house, essentially. So her parents were like, you better come home before this time or you're going to be locked out. Then they kind of reconciled and were like, all right, Leslie, we are going to get you a key, but they had changed the locks and they didn't have a key for her yet. So she was past her curfew, so they locked the doors and went to bed, I assume for like their safety. But it does kind of seem like it was one of those situations where it was like, this is why you don't come, this is what we're going to do to ensure you don't come home past your curfew.
They're giving her consequences.
Right.
Just those are very unsafe consequences.
Yeah. So, and also where she had been was because she was out, one of her friends, like a very close friend, had recently been killed in a car accident. So she had gone to a memorial for him. And then after that, like her and her friends gathered, I think it was just like at a park drinking beer that like an older kid bought them. So they were kind of throwing like a party in their friend's honor. So she got home 3 hours past her curfew, which was 11 p.m. She got home at 2 a.m. and the doors were locked. So since it was so past her curfew, she didn't want to ring the doorbell and wake her parents up because she thought they're probably going to nag me. They're going to be upset that I'm home so late. So she called a friend. She walked to a payphone and called a friend and basically told them that. And they were like, Leslie, just wake your parents up. Like, it's fine. And she was like, okay, I will. And went back home. But she felt reluctant to do that. Like, she was like, I'm going to be in trouble and whatever. So she sat down in her backyard at a picnic table. And a few minutes later, a man in a hooded jacket emerged from the darkness and walked up to her.
Ew, that is so creepy.
Yeah. And of course...
So he was in her... Or he probably saw her walking around and then followed her into the backyard.
He saw her and followed her.
Oh, that is so predictorial.
It was the biggest creep of all time, Paul Bernardo.
And how scary would that be?
I know.
Especially when knowing that you're home, like...
So close to home, but not, like, locked out. So... Paul was in Burlington, so this was in Burlington, which is several hours from St. Catharines. He was on a detour during one of his cigarette smuggling missions because he liked to steal license plates from different neighborhoods, which he would use on his gold Nissan to sneak past the border. So there was this whole thing with the cigarette smuggling where if they change the plates, the border police don't know how many times did you come through, Are you smuggling, whatever.
Just it looks like a different car.
Yeah, so he was like collecting different license plates. However, he spotted Leslie, and he's a predator. So he went up to Leslie. Allegedly, he acted very friendly to her based on what he told Karla later. Apparently, Leslie asked him for a cigarette. She was like, oh, you seem friendly. Do you have a cigarette? I don't know if that's true or not. That's what Paul told Karla, so I don't fucking believe anything Paul says, exactly. Or Karla. So he said, yeah, I've got some cigarettes in my car. It's parked on the next street over. Why don't you come with me? Let's go walk over to my car and I will get you a cigarette. Yeah. So Leslie went with him, but she was a little cautious and she told him, I'm not going to get in the car. I'll just kind of sit, but I'll keep my legs out of the car and not shut the door. However, so he gave her the cigarette, and however, when she turned her head away to blow out smoke, Paul put a knife to her throat and told her, get your legs in the car. So he tied a shirt around her eyes like a blindfold and told her, do everything I say or I'm going to kill you. Classic fucking Paul move. So he pulled the lever on her seat so she was basically lying down and put a blanket over her to cover her up while she just like obviously cried and was really upset. And he drove her like that to Karla's home, being very, very careful to obey all the traffic laws. Well, he did. Really shows how like aware and intentional he is. Yeah,
he knows what he's doing and he's had like years of practice.
This. Yeah, and he's been wanting to do this for a while. Like he's been wanting to abduct someone for a while, like a young woman. So I'm sure he had it all planned out. Like he had a rape kit. It was a whole thing. So when Paul got his hostage home, he informed her that if she tried to run or if her blindfold came off at any point, he would kill her. Because I guess she hadn't clearly seen his face. Like I would
Well, I'm sure
assume-
she saw him, but it's like he doesn't want to know her to know where she is.
Right, that. And he was like kind of wearing a hood and it was dark, so she probably didn't get a super close look at him.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much like detail I should get into it. I like skim a lot of the details because he got his camera right out and started filming her. So there's a lot of fucking details about what he did. But I'll only say what feels very necessary. So he took her to a spare bedroom and tied her to the bedpost with twine. Then he went upstairs to the master bedroom to wake Karla up and let her know that he'd kidnapped a girl. And he told her, okay, Karla, go back to sleep. I'll call you when I'm ready. So Karla was like, yeah, I'll go back to sleep. She basically, like, Karla had said that she was kind of in shock that he actually went through with it, but she wasn't going to, like, go rescue the girl. She was like, I'll just let him get on with it and wait till he calls me.
I'm like, how is this shocking at this point? He's been saying he's going to do
Right,
it.
right.
He's, like, literally a rapist and you're aware of it. Like,
yeah. I don't know if she knows he's the Scarborough rapist. Like,
but she's aware of his
at
rapes.
least that he rapes at least some people. Obviously, like Tammy. So, yeah. So Paul went back to Leslie, punches her in the face to stop her from crying because he's literally garbage on the face of this earth. And we know this because in later videotapes, her lip was visibly bruised. He untied Leslie, undressed her, once again, like his other victims, raped her both anally and vaginally, and then forced her to perform oral sex on him. Then he went to the kitchen and got 2 champagne glasses, filled them both, and put sleeping pills in Leslie's, telling her to drink the whole glass.
Oh, I kind of remember this.
Yeah. So then he got his camera back out and filmed himself assaulting her some more. Like I've said multiple times, not, I guess, yet in this episode, but in previous ones, the transcripts of this assault can be found in Lethal Marriage, which is the book I read. If you want to read the details, they are out there. There's a couple books where you can read the transcripts. It goes into pretty significant graphic detail.
So my question, because like I agree, I don't think you should get into like too much, but is there anything like very specific?
He had some specific fetishes. So one of the things he was really like sexually aroused by, like people urinating or defecating. Like he just like got sexually aroused by that. So he would like film Leslie like going to the bathroom. Like he was like telling her to like, he was like, good job, you're doing great, while filming that. That was like one of his things he was really into. Yeah, kind of random fetish.
That's really disgusting.
Yeah. I mean, especially because it's non-consensual.
Like, was she going to the bathroom like on a toilet or like?
Yeah, I think so.
Ew, that's so
and he was
gross.
just like close up filming it. That was one of his things. His other thing was like basically like vaginal and anal rape. Like he was really into that. That's like one thing he always did. And physical violence. So whenever she'd refuse something, punch, beat her. So that's kind of the gist of it. I will get into more details of like the specific stuff that he wanted to do because it's repetitive. Like the things that he wants can be seen in his relationship with Karla and repeatedly over time. So
defecating.
Yeah, that's like one of his things that turns him on.
That's just really gross.
Yeah, and I believe he also did it on Leslie. I don't think I wrote that down, but he filmed himself. I think he wanted to poop on her, but he couldn't.
So he peed on her. That's so gross.
Yeah, it's gross and shit. Like it's just like for her, like
that is like I would vomit.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
That's so gross.
I mean, like if it's consensual, whatever. But
I mean,
it's still gross.
Whatever,
but I mean, sorry, I shouldn't say it's gross. I don't want to kink shame.
I'm sorry. No, I think it's gross. I'm
kink shame. Kink shame, Madison.
Whatever. I don't care. Like that's gross.
Yeah.
If it's what you want to do, like
do
that's
it,
fine.
but consent. But
go for it.
But this is bad. Because obviously Leslie's not fucking consenting in any way.
When something is gross to you, you can't help it. Like, I can't help but think that's gross.
I think it's pretty gross, but I also, like, don't care if someone... Like, to me, it's like...
No, whatever somebody does in their own home, I don't
it's
care.
like fine. But it's... In this context, it's repulsive.
I still think it's gross.
I'm just trying not to kink shame. I don't want to kink shame, Madison.
I don't want to shame people for, like...
No, I don't know. That's gross. Like a thing. You don't want to kink shame people. It's like, it's important. I don't know. It's important on my home community of Reddit. We don't do that
No,
there.
it's fine, but it's poo.
I know. Okay, so Karla woke up in the morning, went downstairs, and sees Paul and Leslie asleep together on the spare bedroom bed because he'd given Leslie sleeping pills, so she was passed out.
Right.
And fucking biggest creep on the universe decides that I'll sleep next to Leslie. Like that's what he decides. And Karla was absolutely furious, Why? Because Paul had used their most expensive champagne glasses that they were only supposed to use together on special occasions.
I remember this. See, I looked into the case many years ago, and like this,
Like, what are these priorities, Karla?
I remember these champagne glasses.
Yeah, she was pissed that I don't think she said anything, but she was like, "Are you fucking kidding me? You used our champagne glasses,
Yeah,
Paul?"
as if poor girl is like raped and passed out.
Yeah,
and
like
peed on.
Let's check our. I don't think she'd been peed on yet at that point. I think that comes later. There are many details. Check out Lethal Marriage, but it's pretty sickening. That stuff stays with you. Like, I read it years ago, and like it's just
no, yeah,
does not go away. Like, reading the transcripts is definitely
not gonna leave my head.
Yeah, and you might read the book. You were saying you might want to.
Well, yeah, I'm very curious about.
It's pretty interesting. It's not it's sexually graphic, but it's not too violently graphic, if that makes sense. Like, the Anthill Kids, we always refer back to. I feel like that's like our gold standard for like the worst.
Yeah.
But
for
there's
graphic.
Yeah, there's like very graphic depictions of at-home surgeries, which to me is just somehow different.
Well, it's scarier for some reason. It's
scary, but it's
very like Frankenstein-y.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Torture.
Anyways, this stuff's pretty graphic, but the way that the author Nick Prawn describes it in the book I read, because he kind of like describes the transcripts,
right.
And he'll describe it as like the sexual stuff in great detail, and then just be like, and he beat her. Like, he won't just. So that's what he's very explicit about. But so Paul woke up later in the day because he'd been up late, and he was in a great mood because he's the worst and he's
that's
disgusting.
Horrible. Like, you're a horrible person when you're like not raping and murdering people, but like once you start doing that stuff, it's like
that makes you happy.
Just makes you nice and chipper. Like, that's horrific.
He's very, very scary. So he assaulted Leslie some more, which is all on tape and transcribed, and Karla can be seen joining in on assaulting Leslie in the tapes. So basically, like, I didn't write down the descriptions, but like I said, it'll never leave my brain. So it did sound like, because Leslie would be like, you can see her on the footage being like, help me, assuming that she's speaking to Karla. And it seemed like Karla was like a little bit shell-shocked and a little bit like, oh, I don't know about this. But she wasn't like, no, Paul, stop, don't do this, I'm not going to join in. She did join in. But it sounded like she wasn't, like, from the description that this author gave, it sounded like she was a little bit in shock, but very compliant with what Paul wanted. And so that's where they were like bringing her to the bathroom to like pee and poop on her and like all that stuff, and getting Karla to rape her, and getting Leslie to say like, oh, Paul, you're the king, you're the best, I love doing this, like getting her to say all that shit. Ugh. So Paul was like beating her when she refused, raping her throughout the day, and administering sleeping pills to her intermittently.
That poor girl, like, that must be so terrifying. And she was very she's 14.
Yeah, she was 14, and she was very much in fear. Like, the way it describes her, she would just be like lying on the ground in like the fetal position, and they're just like, we're back to torture you some more.
Ugh,
yeah, imagine. So it's just so awful. And I'm sure she pleaded. Like, I don't specifically recall, but I'm sure she was saying, you know, I don't see you guys. I know at one point her blindfold started to slip, and she said, oh, please fix my blindfold. It hasn't slipped yet, but it might. Like, she really believed that maybe she could stand a chance. Like, she was the type of girl, like, or not that she was the type of girl, but she was the type of victim where she was just trying to preserve her life. Like, she wasn't, I don't think she was fighting back too much. I think she was just kind of like, let me do what I can so that they'll let me go.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, Paul apparently told Karla, we're going to have to kill her so she doesn't identify us. And Karla didn't disagree. So allegedly, Karla wanted to give Leslie sleeping pills so that her death would be painless. And when she passed out, apparently, again, allegedly, Paul strangled Leslie with an electrical cord while Karla watched, which was like a very, very graphically described strangulation with like blood coming out of her nose and ears and stuff. And then after they left her for a second, she made a noise, which I believe was just a noise in death.
Yeah.
And they freaked out and then like strangled her some more. So
holy
that's what happened to poor Leslie.
That's horrible.
I know. And like, how sad is it that like she was locked out of her house? Like, the parents, like, how could you ever? Obviously the parents didn't intend for that to happen.
No,
like, I don't blame them in any way.
So
but
guilty.
That
like,
must be like,
can you imagine living with that?
Yeah, like that must be so hard to live with, because it's like that's what caused her to die.
And I think a lot of parents too, it's It's like they were trying to use tough love on her because they thought that would be the best thing for her because they loved her. And it wasn't, clearly. And now they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. And that is just brutal. That is experiencing hell. Yeah. That is what hell is on earth.
Absolutely. Like everything she went through and then everything the family went through. So, yeah. And what I said about Paul strangling Leslie, we'll get into it later, but that's the account that was in Lethal Marriage. So we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, because that wasn't filmed, right?
It was not filmed. Yeah. No deaths were filmed. Which also, again, to me kind of shows, well, obviously this was an intentional murder, but it kind of shows that Paul sexually gets off on rape and abuse.
He doesn't care about the murders. The murders are not.
Some people do. Some people, the murder is a big thing for them. So it's interesting. I think there was no footage of murders.
I do think it's more common for it like not to be about the murder. It's like it's about the torture. It's about the like fear. It's about the rape or whatever. And most of the time, I think it's just you like they saw your face. So
and he liked having, because some people, like I'm thinking like a Jeffrey Dahmer, loved having power over the dead victim. Like he loved having that. Like he loved having
lonely.
Yeah, he loved having like a perfectly submissive servant that could never leave him. Whereas Paul seemed to be more aroused when people would fight back or
or when they showed fear.
Resistance and fear. Yeah, that's what like kind of turned him on more. So he wanted like a living sex slave, quote unquote. So apparently, again, Lethal Marriage said, Karla was freaking out and just panicking, but Paul seemed exhilarated. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. And Karla's parents were coming over for dinner that day, which she was obviously concerned about. So they covered Leslie's body with a blanket and put her in the basement. Paul then told Karla, wash everything that could have any traces of Leslie's DNA, clean up the evidence. So Carol and Dorothy Homolka arrive for dinner, and Paul and Karla give them the tour of the house. Imagine fucking giving your parents a tour of the house while the body of a child that you just raped and murdered is in your basement.
They make me so angry.
It just doesn't, like, you are not humans. Like, that doesn't make sense. And they knew that it's kind of an alibi for them. Like, oh, we were having dinner with our parents that day.
It's very close in timing.
So they gave a tour of the house, including Paul's stupid rap studio. They're like, hey, guys, check out this really important room.
Check out this really important... Oh.
Sorry, it's just like... It just so adds important. Such a layer of like, you're already...
Audacity.
Yeah.
And like shamelessness.
Yeah. And just like, you're such a narcissist that you really think you should have a rap studio.
That's just how you know, like, you just don't give a fuck.
He doesn't. He doesn't have any morality at all. Which, side note, of course, childhood makes sense. But I truly wonder, and we're not going to like disturb them, but I truly wonder what happened to Paul's brother and sister. Because did they turn out normal? Because I think like Robert Pickton, and he was the one who was implicated, but his brother was definitely a part of his crimes. Yeah. A big part. And it's like the nature-nurture thing of, did Paul... I haven't really looked into, I believe Debbie and is his sister, and I forget his brother's name. I haven't really looked into it, but I do wonder if they turned out...
Yeah, and I think murdery, I started this like theory in my head too recently about like, you know how people are like, you know... like two kids, for example, live in the same
super different
house, and like, but like one turns out to be a murder and one's fine. It's like, I think that doesn't necessarily say that like the environment, that it was like a genetic thing or whatever, because I think some like birth order has a lot to do with like, even if you're born in the same house,
like socialization essentially.
Yeah, even if you're born in the same house, like it doesn't mean you're treated the same. It doesn't mean you have the same experiences. Like it doesn't mean like there's a lot of families where like the father will like have a favorite, or the mother treats one badly, or one child
Paul
is
was like the
abused.
bastard child. Yeah.
Or like in a situation where there's 3 siblings and like, you know, there's abuse, like maybe one child takes the reins and is like protective of the other kids. Like I just hear a lot of people say like... There's a lot
of dynamics at play.
Yeah, a lot of people say like they were raised by the same parents. Like how did one turn out that way and the other? It's like very
so interested.
Easy.
Also, like obviously Karla became murdery.
Yeah, and her sisters like were clearly fine.
Yeah, well, one of them's dead, but... So anyways, they're giving the tour of the house, and when they want, like they would like go to the basement, and like they were like about to go to the basement, and they're like, oh, the basement's unfinished. There's nothing to see down there. And then at one point during dinner,
that's risky.
Yeah, and at one point during dinner, I think that I forget what it was. Like they were out of something, or Karla had spilled something, and they went to go down into the Karla's mom, Dorothy, was like, let me just go down into the basement and grab something. And Karla's like, no, I'll get it. Like, okay. So they had dinner and drinks with Karla's parents while poor Leslie's body was down there. And then when the parents left, they started planning to decide like how they're going to get rid of her body. So Paul, ever since he was like a teenager, had talked about this idea, like friends of his would later say he had talked about this idea of committing a perfect crime, where when a murder was committed, he would cut up the body and encase the pieces in cement and throw the cement pieces into the lake, where they would fall to the bottom and never be seen again. So he had this allegedly.
So is he like making molds out of cement? Like what is a cement? What is that?
I'm not exactly sure. The way it was described, it was like they were boxes, so they had a top and a bottom. So I think he like filled a bottom mold and then created a lid, and then I guess like.
So he's molding these out of cement.
Yeah, he went and bought like a ton of cement from the hardware store and whatever, and he paid cash. But then I believe he had like gotten a receipt because he ended up returning some of it, and he was like, "Oh fuck, that's a trace." Like it was this whole thing.
Cut your losses. Like,
yeah, he had to return some of it. Like your priorities are what the fuck. So, anyways, he decided he was going to cut up Leslie's body, encase the pieces of cement, throw the cement pieces into a lake. So he chopped Leslie's body up into 10 pieces with a saw that his grandfather had given him. And he got cement from a store to like encase it within. And apparently he was like really disgusted after he cut up the body and was saying, "Oh, Karla, like I'll never eat meat again. That was awful." And like putting on this whole show.
Can you
like,
imagine chopping up a body?
No. And I think the way it was described was some parts were harder to chop up and he had to really work on it. And it just sounds absolutely disgusting. Like I've said this in another episode, but my dogs eat raw food, and even handling that, which is already kind of processed, is very gross. And sometimes like it's sinewy and it sticks together, and no, I'm not into. I mean, I'm not into.
You're
butchering.
Not into dismembering bodies?
No, not quite. So Paul dropped off some of the concrete blocks because they were very heavy. So this was 10 pieces. So he managed to drop off some of the smaller pieces into the local Lake Gibson on his own. And then he got Karla to help bring more on another trip, while he was like verbally abusing her all the way for making mistakes, like forgetting to put gloves on. So he's just like beating up on her verbally and making her, lift parts of Leslie's body in cement and help him lift them into a lake. And then he also threw the saw he'd used to cut Leslie's body up into the lake to also get rid of that piece of evidence. All that's done. Also, I believe that it's said in Lethal Marriage, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently when Karla's family was over, they noticed like a stain on the rug in the master bedroom and were like, "Hey, what's that?" And Karla's like, "Oh, I spilled some tomato juice." So that happened, apparently. I don't know for sure. So, like I mentioned last time, Leslie's body parts were discovered 2 weeks later, the very same day that Paul and Karla were married, by a man and his son who were fishing at that lake.
So, not really the perfect crime if they're found 2 weeks
later.
Not
at all, because here's the thing. They reported, obviously, finding the body parts to the police, and the police theorized that whoever had dumped the body parts was from the area because they must have been thrown from a certain part, like that was like a side road that a lot of people wouldn't know about. But they must be new to the area because they had left the cement blocks in an area where water levels fluctuated. So people who knew the area well would have known that that area sometimes is more shallow.
Interesting.
And had they known to pick a different spot where that wasn't the case, the concrete boxes may never have been found.
Yeah, because they were just like wading in the water, right?
Knee high.
Yeah.
So it's obvious.
So it's super shallow.
Yeah, super
and probably
shallow,
when they threw it in, it was not.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't when they threw it. And also, like, you could see it clearly with that amount of shallow water. Yeah. So at first, they didn't know whose body it was. I mean,
yeah, why would you?
Yeah, so Leslie's disappearance had been kind of kept quiet in the media. Like, the Niagara police force was being quiet about it, and they hadn't really alerted the media. And then later, when the media kind of was alerted, her disappearance and then eventual murder wasn't highly publicized because she was seen in the media as a runaway at first, as opposed to like a good girl that went missing. So, but since the decapitated head they found had braces, and so did Leslie, they were able to match the body as being hers through dental records they called the parents for. So once Leslie was identified, the local police began to ramp up their search for her killer. However, one challenge they were facing was that, unlike the FBI in the USA, Canada's police forces at the time, I don't know now, but at the time, they didn't have a centralized database. So it obviously significantly limited the efficiency of their investigation. Witnesses had seen a man around the neighborhood the evening that Leslie vanished, and a composite photo was created. At a press conference, it was pointed out that the man in the image resembled the Scarborough rapist composite, and the police agreed to check it out.
Wow, so somebody put that together.
Somebody put it together at a press conference. However, another young woman, I believe by the name of Terry Anderson, had gone missing in Burlington as well at this time, but her disappearance had captured the attention of the media in a way that Leslie's hadn't. So it buried the composite sketch in the news cycle, and just Leslie's case in general wasn't being as talked about, I guess. Yeah. And although a reward of $25,000 for information on anything to do with Leslie's murder had been posted, nothing too much came of it. And at this point, a man named Peter Stark, who was suspected in previous murders of young women in the area, had become the police's major suspect in Leslie's murder. So they had this other guy, Peter Stark, that they were surveilling, that they thought he was already suspected of previous murders in the area. And over $4 million was spent investigating that guy, Peter Stark. So did he end up, was he a murderer? Do we know? I don't know, to be honest. He definitely didn't murder Leslie, but he was suspected. I mean, he was a known creep, and the police knew of him and stuff. Maybe he murdered that other girl. I'm not sure. So that was June of 1991. Like I said last episode, Paul and Karla were married June 29th, the same day Leslie's body parts were found. So Paul and Karla went on a honeymoon to Hawaii, and then as far as we know, they did not commit any more crimes together until the following April 1992. So it was a big chunk of time. It was a big chunk of time that goes in between pretty much every source I read. I'm not sure if it was one of those situations, because I know Paul was becoming very paranoid and was the police are wiretapping me, and was super paranoid. So I don't know if he wanted to lay low. I don't know if he was raping in the meantime. Especially because that was a pretty big murder with and the body parts were found. Yeah, exactly. So that's already I mean, he's crazy, but he's not stupid. Yeah, because for him, he's never ever been even there's never even been anything where anything, you know what I mean? There's body parts to be found. Right. Or even with Tammy's death, it was oh, it's accidental. Yeah. So and it was quickly this determined to be accidental and then done. Right. This was finally maybe shaking up his confidence. Coincidentally, early in April of 1992, investigators from the sexual assault squad of the Toronto Metro Police had narrowed down the list of suspects in the Scarborough rapist case from 224 down to 5 possible suspects based on their forensic testing. So you'll recall Paul gave his DNA voluntarily November of 1990. It is now April of 1992, 2.5 years later. They have narrowed the suspects down to 5. And is he one of them? One of them was Paul. Thank God. Yeah, thank fucking God. However, because the lab was backlogged with other cases, they weren't going to be able to start a full DNA analysis on these 5 suspects until the fall, and the results probably wouldn't be in until the following January. So that is very slow hunt for the Scarborough rapist. How did anybody solve any crimes before? I feel now everything is, it's so efficient. Well, and it's just because everything's, everywhere you go, you're on camera. There's cell phone towers, all that's how people get caught now. But back then, it's Google search history. Yeah, everyone's searching things on now. Before it was way easier to get away with murder. Yeah, I don't know how they solved anything. They had no database. Right, their DNA is not being tested. I think they didn't solve very many things. That's why so many cases are either being solved now or that's insane. I know. So one thing I also will mention is that there were a few more instances, just at varying points in time, where Paul almost was caught for something, which is so frustrating. Yeah. Because I had mentioned a few where he had raped a girl and 2 men chased him, but he got away. There was one time I recall where he was repeatedly following women in his car and filming them. And somebody, it was just so creepy. So somebody calls. It's so blatant. It's, yeah, it really is. So somebody called, or maybe he thought they didn't notice. I don't know. Somebody called saying, hey, this car's following me. Here's the license plate. And the police are like, oh, that license plate isn't for a gold Nissan. It's for a black Mazda. So, and it's some random guy, because Paul had fake license plates on his car. Another time, he was regularly staking out this one specific parking lot over time, because there was this one waitress he was really attracted to that worked there. So he was Karla, I'm gonna fucking rape this waitress, whatever. So he was constantly in this parking lot. I believe had his camera as well. So one woman saw that and was like, I'm gonna call the police. This guy's creeping around. What the hell is that? And so this time he had the correct plates on. I believe it was like 660 something, gold Nissan, whatever. And the police were like, oh yeah, that's a gentleman by the name of Paul Bernardo. He has no criminal record. And being creepy in a parking lot isn't a crime, so can't do anything, lady, because they didn't have the database that had him as a suspect as the Scarborough rapist, and he hadn't been implicated in Tammy's death at all.
Yeah, imagine they searched it up and were like, oh,
he's the fucking Scarborough.
1 out of 5 chance he's a Scarborough rapist? Yeah, let's take a look at this creep.
Yeah, so there was that. Those were 2 instances I recall off the top of my head. I believe there might have been 1 or 2 more similar things like that, but it's just so frustrating to know, like, he could have almost been caught.
Lives would have been
multiple
saved.
Points, yeah. Because unfortunately, Paul and Karla were going to commit 1 more abduction, rape, and murder. So it's not over.
And I'm sure they would have done more if they had been.
Actually, interesting how it all wraps up.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I'll get to that. This episode we're going to talk about up until basically like the end of their crimes. So together. So April 19th, 1992. 15-year-old Kristen French was the youngest of 5 children. She was a very athletic young woman who belonged to multiple sport clubs as well as being a straight-A student. Every day, she walked home from the Holy Cross Catholic school that she attended, and that 15-minute walk home was really the only time she was alone all day. As she crossed the school parking lot on the afternoon of April 19th, 1992, a woman in a parked car flagged her down. The young blonde woman was holding a map and asked Kristen to help her with directions.
Fucking Karla.
Right. And the young woman, Karla, was so frazzled because she was stressed with Paul, like, you know, verbally beating up on her, that she actually had picked up the wrong map and wasn't even holding a map of St. Catharines. She was holding one of Scarborough. So she had the wrong map, but Kristen didn't notice. Because Kristen approaches the car to take a look at the map, at which point a man got out.
Which you never do.
Yeah. Just don't, any car that slows down, just do not get anywhere near it.
Yeah. Especially if you're a young girl.
Yeah, or just in general. Like, there's no... Well, now people have GPS.
They can
like,
stop
whatever.
a big burly man.
Right.
If they need directions.
Right, yeah. And also now, obviously, people don't need directions anymore because GPS, but still. So Kristen approached the car to take a look at the map, at which point a man got out of the car and advanced on her from behind, holding a knife up to her neck and ordering her to get in the car. By the way, school parking lot, mid-afternoon.
And so he wasn't in the car, he was hiding nearby.
I believe he was in the car. I think he might have been in the back seat and Karla was in the driver's seat, something like this. Karla was definitely in the driver's seat.
He wasn't visible?
He popped out, from behind her.
Because like it's much as a young girl, you're like, oh, a woman,
that's
fine.
That's why. Yeah. That's why Karla was the bait. So held a knife to her neck, ordered her to get in the car. Kristen really fought against him. She was very, very brave. But obviously, he overpowered her. Yeah. Big man. Teenage girl.
And there's 2 of them.
Yeah. So in the struggle, the man didn't notice that one of Kristen's shoes, a loafer, had fallen off. And also a piece of the map had ripped and fallen to the ground as well. So there was quite a struggle getting her into the car. Again, broad fucking daylight. School parking lot. Like,
that's insane. And it's a weekday?
Yeah. She was heading home from school.
So like there was no one in the parking lot? Or like
there were some people around. So there were
like,
witnesses, which we will get to.
Bold.
Very, very bold. So for weeks prior, maybe even months prior, Paul Bernardo had been stalking out local schools, planning to find another quote-unquote virgin to abduct and use as a sex slave and then murder afterwards. And on that day, with the help of his wife Karla, he had once again succeeded in abducting a young woman. So Karla drove home while Paul subdued Kristen in the back seat. When they got home, Karla closed all the blinds, unplugged all the phones, and gave Paul a shirt to use as a blindfold on Kristen, who, even though she'd already seen them, this was with the goal of disorienting her and making her more fearful and easy to control. Mm-hmm. So Paul told Karla, wait downstairs. He brought Kristen to the master bedroom, and like he had done with Leslie, he filmed himself raping her vaginally, anally, and then forced her to perform oral sex on him, but not before punching her aggressively when she initially refused. So same exact shit once again.
Yeah.
At that point, Paul noticed that she was missing a shoe and got pissed at Karla for not noticing that Kristen had lost it. But he was thrilled, obviously, because he had another person to torture. So like he had with Leslie, he did the thing where he was like, go to the bathroom. I need to film you like urinating. Something he was super into. And then Karla told Paul, we should use a different sleeping pill other than Halcyon with Kristen because they knew they were going to kill her since she'd seen both their faces, and maybe it was part of it all along. I don't know. But they, at least to dispose of the evidence, they knew they were going to kill her.
Yeah. And I think at that point, it's like, we did it. We can get away with it. We know we can do it again.
This is how we do it. So they didn't want...
how we do
that's what they're singing while they do it.
Sorry.
So they didn't want the two murders to be linked by police because they knew, like, they had this whole plan for how they're going to dispose of Kristen's body, which I don't know if they made it this plan before they actually abducted her or if it was made on the fly. But I will tell you how, like, their whole plan for how they were going to dispose of her body. But they knew the police were going to find her body. I will just say that for now and get more into the details later. And they didn't want Leslie and Kristen's murders at that point to be linked. So actually that will change. But so they used some other sleeping pills, which Karla had gotten from a doctor, to subdue Kristen. A missing person alert was issued for her, and while that was going on, Paul and Karla taped themselves violently sexually assaulting her over the course of several days because they, like, apparently were, like, really, really attracted to Kristen, so they wanted to, like, keep her longer. So, yeah, so they would, like, film her, like, several days, again, transcripts in Lethal Marriage of assaults, and they were doing, like, the same things with Leslie and the same things with Karla, role-playing as Tammy, where they were saying, like, you know, say you're, like, a useless, like, sex slave for Paul and tell Paul how much you love him. So she had to be like, I love you, Paul. I love you, Karla. So that was happening.
Disgusting.
It's so disgusting. And again, like, kind of the same patterns repeating.
There's a huge
like,
pattern here.
Totally.
Where, like, the exact same thing.
He wants the
and now they've done it so many times, like, they know exactly what they want. They
just have, like, a whole plan. And
it's very serial.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's very interesting how Paul always wants his victims to say they love him. Like, that's kind of fucked up. Like, you probably were never told you were loved as a kid, which is very sad, but this is not what love is. But also, he grew up always equating love as abuse, which is very sad. Still does not excuse any of this. But as far as the why, I think it says a lot.
Absolutely.
So,
and it's a power thing too. Like, he wants, like, the victim to be completely compliant.
But also gets turned on when she doesn't, and then he can, like, beat her into submission. Also, have to say this several times. I don't think this was on tape, but it was mentioned several times in Lethal Marriage that Paul would get Kristen to listen to some of his rap music and sing his terrible lyrics to her, like, hey, Kristen, check out this rap music.
What?
I'm a, like, fucking white rapper, and, like, rap at her. And she would just be like, it's great. I don't want you to beat me, so it's awesome.
Oh my God, that's
it's, like, the worst crime of all. Like, not obviously joking. It's not, but it's just, like, you're just, like, the lack of self-awareness, the lack of just, like, any, like, the complete self-obsession that you think you have any right to make this poor girl go through any of this, and then on top of that listening to your rap, which is horrible. Like, we've heard his rap, we played it last time. His raps are bad. They are objectively terrible.
It just shows, like, how delusional.
Yes, that's the right word for both of them, I would say.
Yeah, I think she's delusional and he's just, like,
they're both fucking
just
delusional.
Complete narcissist.
Yeah, he is. And he, like, obviously the thing with narcissists is, like, they'll always talk about their lies as if they're true, and then they want people around them to, like, support
buy
it.
Into it.
Yeah, and they want people to, like, back them up. So obviously he's like, yeah, Karla, I'm the king, right? And Karla's like, yeah, you deserve all the sex slaves in the world. Maybe because she gets off on that. Maybe because she doesn't want to get beaten by him. Maybe a combination of both.
Maybe because she loves him and, like, she thinks he's really cool. Like, who knows?
Maybe. But definitely some people have speculated that Karla had this condition where she got aroused by her partner's sexual violence. Some people do speculate that. Whereas others speculate she was an abused woman. She was just in survival mode. I kind of think the truth is somewhere in between.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that for sure. Because
I don't think it's, like, one or the other. Yeah, like, it could be both. She's, like, way too involved for her to just be, like, a poor victim.
Right, exactly. And, well, we'll get into it a little bit more later, but she did, at least from right now, what we know initially is she did have some interest in, like, sadomasochism, which doesn't have to go, obviously the BDSM community is about consent. Yeah. So that's, like, that's where you're not really doing it, but we at least know that she had some sexual interest in violence.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, while they're torturing Kristen, a local woman was watching TV and saw a news alert about Kristen's disappearance, which the police right away or very soon knew that it was a kidnapping because they found her missing shoe in the parking lot. As well, they found a lock of hair, and that was forensically analyzed and determined to match hairs from Kristen's hairbrush. The woman who had, this woman who called the police while watching TV, seeing the news alert, she had seen a man leaning into a car in the parking lot, struggling with what looked like a large package in the car. She called the police to report what she saw, but all she was sure of was that the car was a 2-door sporty type car.
And this was the gold Nissan?
It was the gold Nissan. She thought it might have been a Camaro, but she wasn't sure. Several other witnesses, because obviously there were fucking witnesses, this was broad daylight, several other witnesses corroborated to the police that the car in the parking lot could have been a Camaro, but they weren't sure either.
Yeah. Because who the fuck knows? Like, I would never know.
I would not know either. So that's what the police had to go on. So the Niagara police put a bulletin across North America saying that a beige 2-door Camaro was the vehicle that was wanted in the kidnapping of Kristen French. Billboards with photos of a mid-1980s model of a Camaro were put up as well.
Oh,
and men around the area and at the border who drove those types of Camaros were being stopped and like aggressively searched by the police. So there would just be a man driving his beige mid-90s Camaro and police would be like, get the fuck out of the car. We need to search you. Like they would be like, maybe they didn't say it like that, but it was like aggressive, like get out, like you're a sexual predator. Meanwhile, Paul drives a fucking gold Nissan.
Yeah.
So
wrong color, wrong
big
name.
Fucking fail. So the media's attention was really like piqued by this case. Kristen, I guess, like
she was so young,
and she was like a straight A student, stolen in broad daylight from the parking lot, whereas Leslie had been viewed as like a runaway.
Yeah, and she went missing in the middle of the night, so it's like it's more like
she was out.
There's no indication to see if she came home,
right?
Whatever.
So, so over the next 10 months, a complete fucking failure of an investigation was launched, featuring 30 detectives plus support staff and costing an estimated $10 million in taxpayer money. All of this investigation was based on the faulty assumption that the kidnapper they were looking for drove a beige Camaro.
Oh, how could you go so hard on that when she clearly didn't know?
I think they were just I guess they were just like, we have nothing else to go off of.
That's like,
but that's still like aggressive to search.
Like it's something because like at least you can know like the location and like maybe a general description of the guy, but like to like just like.
We're going to spend billions of dollars
go
on this
hardcore on like the make and model when she clearly was like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what they did. And I have photos, we'll put them up, of the billboards that were like, have you seen this car? So initially, police didn't consider that there was a link between Leslie's death and Kristen's kidnapping because Leslie's death had happened in Burlington and Leslie's kidnapping, was from Burlington, and Kristen's kidnapping was from St. Catharines, which were several hours apart from each other, and as well because they were focused on that guy Peter Stark as being Leslie's murderer.
Right.
So it's I believe it's in the same jurisdiction. Maybe it's not, but either way, they're not being connected at all at that point. Back at their house, Paul and Karla continued to abuse Kristen physically and sexually for several days. Here's where several fucking days. 3 days, I believe, at least. On tape, Karla is shown visibly enjoying assaulting Kristen and forcing Kristen to perform sexual acts on her. Again, was she playing like she was enjoying it to appease Paul?
For 3 days.
But the way it's described in Lethal Marriage, it's like Karla was moaning in pleasure. Karla was like clearly enjoying it. Like it was described as her loving it. And she would say things like, I love little girls, and just generally like acting like she was enjoying herself.
It's disgusting.
She alleged later, she would later say, I don't like lesbian sex. I'm not into it. I just do it because Paul makes me. But in the tapes,
it's very easy to say that he made you do it after the fact.
But it so again, transcripts in Lethal Marriage, the transcripts of Tammy's rape and murder or manslaughter, whatever, Karla's like crying, no, I don't want to rape her, Paul. I don't want to be involved in this. You just do it. Leslie and Kristen's tapes, Leslie's tape, Karla's really getting in on it, but she's acting a little bit like she from the descriptions that I read, she's not as like enthusiastic. She's just like doing it, or maybe, I don't know. It seemed, the way it was described seemed less, but here it's like she was loving it. And same with the Jane Doe one, which some sources put Jane Doe's assault that she was let go June 7th, which would have been 2 weeks before Leslie Mahaffey was kidnapped and murdered by them. But in Lethal Marriage, the Jane Doe rape is listed after Leslie.
Right.
So, however, a lot of official sources I read, or like not official, but like seemingly more legit sources I read said June 7th, so it was before. But anyways, so it seems like Karla's like genuinely loving this, which I think is very, very interesting. Like not in a good way. It's disgusting, but I think it's interesting as far as the extent of Karla's voluntarily involvement in this situation and how much gratification she's getting from it. So then when Paul went out to get food, Kristen tried to convince Karla to let her go and escape with her and was like, come on, we can leave him. Like, I know you're scared of him too. Like, I really need to go home and see my people. But Karla was like, no, that's not happening. She just refused. So Karla had a chance to let Kristen go. At least one, if not more. Because what happened was Paul was like, I want to get...
I remember this too.
Yeah, he was like, I'm going to go get food. And Kristen was like, I specifically want this type of food that I know it's going to take you a little while to get. So I can... Yeah, Kristen was like very much a fighter. Like she was like, I'm not going to just let this happen. Interestingly, although Karla denied it later, in like footage, it looked like Kristen's face had been bruised by a rubber mallet, which was what Paul had given Karla in case she needed to use that. So it looked like while Paul was out, Karla had seriously beaten Kristen with a mallet. So it's like, I don't know.
Not an innocent
was
victim.
was she doing that because she was like, Kristen, I just need you to shut up and like stop? Or was she doing it because I'm getting pleasure out or feeling...
Well, I'm sure, and my theory from my limited knowledge is that like she resented all these people that Paul wanted.
She was channeling her anger that should have been to Paul to...
But it's like
victims.
her feelings would have been jealousy. Like, this is my husband, and he wants to like...
You're nothing.
Like basically, she chooses... Like, she sees these victims of like rape, assault, and murder as just like people he's cheating on her with.
It could
basically be the equivalent.
It could be like, honestly, the way I see it is very much from my perspective as a dog trainer, I have to say. Dog psychology, because I don't know like human psychology that much, I guess, but with dogs, it's like when dogs are in a stressful or abusive situation, there's not every dog is going to react the same way. There's going to be the dog that's just like completely shutting down under pressure and cowering. There's going to be the dog that's like lashing back at the human in the situation. And there's going to be the dog that just redirects and takes their aggression or frustration or stress out on a weaker dog.
Yeah.
So, and that's like, that dog is not like, the weaker dog is not at all trying to go for you. They're not trying to start any conflict at all. But the dog in stress is going at that dog.
Yeah.
And that's a way for them, because they feel weak, they feel stressed. It's a
way that they can feel power.
Yeah, and it's a way that they can feel slightly less weak. So for Karla, that's psychologically where I see her. Yeah. I feel like she is somebody who, for sure, Paul was horrific to her. He was horrible to her. So for her, her psychology is in a really, like, her mental health is in a terrible place. Even if she was... like a shitty sadistic person, which kind of seems like she is. We don't really know, I guess, but I don't know. But no matter what, like, Paul was triggering her to be in a really bad mental place. And so whether or not she would have done it had Paul not been around, we don't really know.
I doubt it.
But with that condition in place, she was taking it out on the weaker people. That's the vibe that I get. And she probably was getting some degree of gratification from it, whether it was genuine, I feel better now, or just like an adrenaline rush, which can be very addictive. So I definitely think she was an active participant in beating Kristen, in raping Kristen, probably with Leslie too, maybe intentionally murdering Tammy. And I think that's why she was like, I think that's her, not her like conscious motivation, but I think subconsciously she was like, I'm feeling all this rage. I had this perfect fantasy life taken away from me. Now it's a fucking nightmare. Now I have to deal with this horrible guy day in and day out. I'm stuck with him because he has footage of me raping my sister, so I can't leave him. He is, and like, she's probably so pissed off. Like, we saw how angry she was that the champagne glasses were used. So I think she did beat Kristen, and she probably was satisfied by doing it.
And like, the champagne glasses to me show that like she still wants to have this perfect life. She's still showing to everybody
to that
image. She's still like showing to the world that is the image that she has. So she's like, okay, I have to just go and do this like dark underworld horrible shit to maintain this image
This
of perfection
lie.
in my life, and like, all right, I'm just gonna do it. And that's, to me, is just like where you see that she's a bad person, because it's like, dude,
Yeah.
just
I mean, the
get
Tammy
out.
thing
Like,
didn't fucking tip you off?
like,
Yeah.
no, but it just like how I just feel like she really badly wants to show like
Right.
how perfect her life is.
Yeah, she doesn't want to admit.
And that is selfishness.
I think it's selfishness. I think there's an element of denial, but I think like beyond a doubt, this girl is only thinking about herself.
Yes.
Like she's not.
She's a very self-centered individual.
Yeah, that's very much the vibe that I get from all of this. And I think it's interesting to what extent does she actually receive gratification from like the rapes and all that stuff. So finally, Paul was done with Kristen. It was on the 4th day since they kidnapped her. And she had been, like I said, really like struggling against him and fighting back and becoming
like 4 days. Like,
yeah, 3 days. I think it was 3 days. Yeah, and they were I think it had been 3 days and it was on the 4th day. Or no, sorry, it had been 3 days. Sorry, I said that wrong. But basically, like, they'd been periodically dosing her with sleeping pills as well. So she's like groggy, disoriented, and making her listen to his fucking rap music. So she was becoming increasingly more like resistant. And she called Paul a bastard, which like really triggered him because that's like what his mom had called him. And on camera, the last thing she said was, "I don't know how your wife can stand to be around you," to Paul. And Paul was just like, "Shut the fuck up. Just shut up," like on camera. So she was just like obviously realized, I think she knew she'd always seen them. Unlike Leslie, I don't think she had any hope that she was going to be let go.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Leslie was more subdued because she thought she was going to be let go. She was blindfolded. Kristen was blindfolded at one point, but then it's like not for the rest of it.
3 days.
Yeah. And she saw their faces, everything. So at that point, allegedly, based on lethal marriage, Paul got the electrical cord that he'd used to strangle Leslie and strangled Kristen for 7 minutes until she was dead. So it was now 4 days after Kristen had been kidnapped, and it was Easter Sunday morning. So I believe it was 3 days, and on the end of the 3rd day was when she was killed. Morning after, Paul and Karla were once again supposed to have dinner with Karla's parents that night. But
what? That's such
it's just like a thing, yeah. But I think this time it was at the Homolka's house.
Okay.
But still alibi for timeline-ish.
True.
I don't know. So they wanted to dispose of the evidence and the DNA before they went out for dinner. So they cut off Kristen's hair, not to impede identification, but because they thought some of the fibers of their carpet, where they'd been like raping her on the carpet, they thought maybe some of those fibers could have attached to her hair. So let's cut that hair off. And they scrubbed her body clean in the bathtub, making sure to clean out like her vagina and rectum to clear out any Paul's semen. And then they burned all her clothes and her belongings in their fireplace and wiped down everything that she might have touched. They covered Kristen's body with a blanket and laid her corpse in the master bedroom and then went over to the Homolkas for dinner.
Damn.
But can you fucking imagine? Oh, hey, Mom and Dad.
No,
like, no wonder
I can't
Karla's
imagine.
dead behind the eyes.
Yeah.
I'm sure she was a long time ago, but yeah. So they did that. Paul decided, I don't know if it was at this point or what, this is what I was mentioning before, they decided that they should dump the body in Burlington, thinking that if Kristen's body was found in the same city as Leslie Mahaffey, where she disappeared from, investigators would think the killer was from Burlington. They drove, and apparently, this is like from Lethal Marriage, apparently Paul initially was like, hey, we should take Kristen's body and dump it on Leslie's grave, and then they'll know the two cases were related and in Burlington.
So they want them to be related.
Now they want them to be related, but to think it's a killer from Burlington.
Yeah, so that doesn't...
So apparently they drove around and couldn't find Leslie's grave. Like, obviously, how would you find it? I don't know if that's true or not. That's from Lethal Marriage. So then they instead drove Kristen's body to an illegal dumping site, and they left her body visible, barely covered some leaves over her at this illegal dumping site, so that the police would find it and focus their attention on that area instead of Port Dalhousie. So instead of the area that Paul and Karla lived, which was also where Leslie's body had been found, like they had put her body parts in cement in the Dalhousie Lake.
Yeah.
So now they're like, oh no, it was in Burlington. The killer just happened to put Leslie's body parts.
Because they know that Leslie was taken from Burlington and then just like happened, and they knew that the people who dumped her, or they're alleging that the people who dumped her were not didn't know the area well.
Yeah, they were from the area enough to know
but
that.
New to the area.
Yeah. So 2 weeks later, end of April, early May, a man scavenging for scrap metal came across Kristen's body. Police were quickly able to identify her because although her face had become like decomposed, she had a deformity where she was missing the top part of her left pinky finger. So they were easily able to identify it as her. At this point, the police decided that the murders of Leslie and Kristen were likely connected. Although this wasn't released to the public, the autopsies of both young women showed 2 bruises, one on either side of their spinal column, consistent with an imprint of a pair of knees, as if a pair of knees were on their back, strangling them. Because I guess although Leslie was dismembered, they had enough. Like, I think the torso was all. Yeah. So they had also heard from witnesses that they'd seen 2 people in the car that abducted Kristen, and an FBI profile determined that it was likely a duo of a dominant and submissive pair, most likely with sexual crimes on record, probably at least one of them with a blue-collar job like a mechanic. And back when they did the Scarborough rapist case, it was a different profile. They thought it was like more of like an up-and-coming young man.
And like, fair enough, there was 2 different, like,
super different,
one person versus 2 people,
and super different crimes, murder versus rape. So there was a task force created in charge of searching for Kristen's killer, and it was named the Green Ribbon Project because Kristen's classmates had started wearing green ribbons in her honor, which is very, very sad. And across the province, I mentioned this before, but thousands of pamphlets and billboards continue to be posted reading, "Have you seen this car?" with a photo of a 1981 Camaro, even though the police had originally said they were looking for a 1982 model, which looked quite different.
And like, how did from the woman going like, I don't know.
Maybe it's a Camaro.
How did they go to like, it's a 1982 model?
And now they're fucking, even they thought that, and they still posted a photo of a 1981 one, which looked different. Like the curves of the car were different. So it was just like a complete failure of an investigation. Meanwhile, as this whole investigation is going on, Karla's busy dressing up as a schoolgirl and role-playing as Kristen during sex with Paul.
Disgusting.
Because of fucking course they have to do that and like replay the tapes and whatever. Paul just being horrible and Karla either enjoying it or forcibly playing along. Who knows? Maybe a little bit of both. Also, not relevant to the story, but obviously I had to include this. They adopted an iguana named Spike, just so you know.
So now they have
Buddy, the Rottweiler, and an iguana named Spike. Like, Karla was an animal lover, so that's kind of like a key thing in this case because obviously the vet clinic was where she stole drugs from. But iguanas aren't actually really that good pets because they grow really, really big and people shouldn't really have them as pets. So anyways, not relevant, but I feel like I always have to bring in the animal facts. So at one point, 12 days after Kristen's body was found, someone who knew Paul and was like creeped out by him tipped off the police that he could be involved in the kidnappings of the young women. I believe it was one of his friends who was like, yeah, you know, Paul talks about raping women sometimes. Like, maybe it could be him.
The perfect crime.
Right.
With the encased body parts.
Yeah. Sounds fucking familiar. I don't know if it was the same person, but basically he told the police, like, hey, you should check this guy out. So the police were like, all right, let's go check him out. So they showed up at his house and were like, hey, we just wanted to ask you some questions. But as they're like looking around, they're like, okay, wait, this guy has photos of him and his like beautiful wife. Questionably, I know. On the mantelpiece. This guy's a clean-cut, white-collar type guy. This guy seems nervous, but we're police, so fine. But he's very compliant and answering our questions. So he probably doesn't fit the profile of this blue-collar, rough sex crime guy that we're looking for. So they interviewed him, and Paul was just super, like, he just played it off, and they were like, all right, can't be him. And Paul was like, haha, Karla, I just fooled the police. Like, obviously, it was giving him more, like, fuel for his ego. So once again, could have been caught, but through circumstances, he was not. So as time went on, Paul grew increasingly agitated because he feared that like police were trailing him. He was just needing like constant stimulation. So he was like cruising around looking for women. Then he was like, Karla, do this sexual stuff with me. And then he's like, Karla, I'm mad at you. Let me beat the shit out of you. And Karla, come with me on this run for cigarettes. Even though you have to go to your work in the morning, like just like
it's like an addiction that just you keep.
He was like out of control.
Yeah,
super agitated.
You keep needing more and more and more.
Yeah, and again,
tolerance is lowered.
Right. So Kristen, they had kidnapped her. I believe it was April 19th. I want to make sure I get that day right. April 19th, and so her body was found like around May. And around this time, as far as I know, no successful rapes or murders. Not successful is the wrong word for it, but you know what I mean? No like carried out rapes or murders happening. But Paul's just like super like agitated, intense, and violent with Karla. And he started like beating her on the legs and arms with a flashlight when he was mad at her. So like causing significant bruises, which like people at the vet clinic would notice. And she'd be like, oh, Buddy and I were wrestling. That's how it happened. And he'd do this like, he'd do all these like crazy punishments, quote unquote. Like Karla didn't really do anything. It was like, Karla, you spilled something on the floor. Like, I'm going to fucking beat you. Like he would like, Karla, you didn't say I love you enough. Like, I'm going to attack you now. And so one of the really terrifying things he did was he locked her in the basement with the lights off, and he told her, or like he closed her in the basement. I don't know if he locked her necessarily, and told her like, Leslie's ghost is down there. Like she's going to attack you. And then he was like, don't come out until like the morning. Don't come out for hours. And she did come out like a little bit, and Paul was waiting in the hallway and like scared her. Like he's just like
so creepy.
Such a horrible, like just living with him is a nightmare. Like I'm sure for him every day is mental torment and anguish since he's grown up, but he's like a tornado of toxicity that just like puts it on everyone else around him. So
he's a monster.
Yeah, he is the definition. Absolutely. Like I think there's very, very little human qualities there. So,
but you know, at the same time, I was listening to some other true crime thing about some really horrible guy, and he like kidnapped a girl and had her for a while, and then he ended up letting her go, and she testified at his trial, and she was like really nice to him in a kind of a way. And the person describing it was like, you know, we call these people monsters, but like this is a human being. This is like what happens to human beings. Like this is a piece of humanity, and this is like this is like what logically happens to people in these circumstances. Right. So like thinking that this is so far out of like what a human being is just not right.
It comes down to the socialization. It's like Lord of the Flies again, where it's like those boys probably weren't monsters. I mean, it's a fictional book, but those boys like were fine, like normal boys. But once they were in this extreme social circumstance, they became murderers. They went into a frenzy.
And I even buy that like there's something wrong in his head. Like there's some sort of genetic thing.
Maybe not even genetic, but maybe like frontal lobe trauma. You know what I mean?
No, but I think there's possible, like if you cycle it down, like if the grandfather's an abuser and the father's an abuser, yeah, it's probably they're all socializing each other, but maybe they also have a genetic disposition as well.
Yeah. I think it's a bit of both.
And maybe it's a genetic disposition to like extra anger or being aggressive.
Right.
And then it's just like, then you throw in more stuff
being
abused.
And with Paul, obviously, like he never had a positive influence in his life. He never had a good relationship. So for him, it's like he continues to seek out and attract the same abusive situations where he's gaining power by like abusing the weaker, quote unquote, women. Not that they're weaker than him, but he makes them weaker. He convinces them that they are. So,
and they're just more vulnerable.
Right. Younger and all that stuff. And he like knows how to manipulate them. So skipping ahead a couple of months to the winter, December of 1992. Again, from what I understand, no crimes committed in between April and December that are proven, like, without a doubt. There were, side note, like, there were a few crimes that Paul has either been accused of later on, or Paul and Karla, or maybe during this time. There's been a couple of cases where it's like, this girl disappeared, these rapes in New York, and Paul could have been in New York. Like there was like certain situations, but nothing known for sure. And I believe any trial, if any of them did get taken to trial, were always inconclusive. So we don't know. So I'm only going to say the things that we know beyond a doubt. But maybe they were committing other crimes. I'm not sure. But skipping ahead a couple months, December 27th, 1992 was the beginning of the end for Paul and Karla's relationship.
Finally.
Yeah. Met in October 1987. Now it's 1992, so 5-year relationship. Which 5 years too long, man.
5 years of just chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah. So in Lethal Marriage, it says that Paul essentially was just, like I said, super agitated all the time and would just work himself into these intense states of anger and resentment for no significant triggering reason. It would be like dumb shit. And so this was December 27th, 1992. And so I believe they were driving back home from smuggling cigarettes. He was getting pissed at Karla in the car and he started hitting her. But this time he was hitting her and punching her in her face and head. with his fist,
which he didn't do before.
He had not done previously. So Karla woke up the next morning. Her face was swollen, her cheeks were bruised, and one eye was almost swollen completely shut.
I remember these photos.
Oh, that's not even yet the photos. I have them, but it's not even this. It gets like it's past this. It's after this, those photos. So she was like pretty beaten up, but he beat her with his fists. So apparently Paul wanted to go out with some friends that night, and he told Karla, hide in the closet so they don't see your face when they get to the house. Like, you're just absolutely despicable. When he came back from drinking, he apparently hugged her and said, hey, Karla, I know things have been pretty rough for us lately, but I promise everything will get better. Like, it's me and you against the world.
Everything's fine.
Like, oh, okay, sure. And then Karla like cried and was like, okay, thanks, Paul. Like, I'm sure she didn't believe it at this point, but she probably was just like, this is all I have. Like, I'm sure she's so beaten down at this point. Like, I really want to make it clear that in my opinion, I don't think it was a scenario. It was like, Paul and Karla, these two evil people, but we're really nice to each other, but let's pick on these, like, and murder these other people.
It was
Karla was a victim of Paul too.
Yeah.
She absolutely was. So no surprise, Paul started punching Karla in the head again a couple days later because he didn't like the way she'd taken a phone message. Like, one of the reasons that he'd get mad at her was like, Karla, you forgot to tape The Simpsons. And he would like fucking lose it on her. So a couple of days into the new year of 1993, Karla went back to work at the animal clinic, and her face was still bruised from Paul like punching her. But she told her coworkers she'd been in a car accident, and they were like, you're clearly lying. Like,
yeah, and these are the people who would recognize this pattern.
Right, there's been a pattern at this point. So one of her coworkers got her friend to make an anonymous call to Karla's parents. I think Karla, I get the impression that she's difficult to confront, and she probably just shuts people down when they try and confront her, which is a coping mechanism. Like, it is like not unheard of that she would do that. But I think they were like, all right, just call the parents because this has got to stop. So in the call, the friend said, anonymously, you better get help for your daughter. She's hurt really bad. That's all they said. So Karla's parents didn't know what the caller necessarily meant, but they were worried.
That sounds like she's like dead on the side of the road.
Like, it could be anything, right? Yeah. So they headed over to Paul and Karla's house on Bayview Drive. However, nobody was home because Paul had gotten Karla to go with him on a cigarette smuggling run. So the Homolkas called 911, and the police basically said, well, it's possible that anonymous call you got was just like a sick prank, because what are we supposed to do about it?
Yeah.
So the parents went back home. When Paul and Karla returned home, it was after midnight with a car filled with cigarettes, and Paul was, guess what, extremely angry as usual. So he started going off at Karla for not covering up her bruises with makeup. Then he started beating her on the head and body with a flashlight. At home, he told Karla, put on the favorite dress of mine that I like. He handcuffed her, and he raped her anally while strangling her with the electrical cord that he'd allegedly used to kill Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey. He let up right when she was about to lose consciousness, just to basically show her like he had full control over ending her life, very like playing God. And Karla was left extremely afraid and very, very angry.
Damn.
Because he just like totally assaulted her. So I'm going to show you a photo of Karla's injuries at this point. Yeah, isn't that fucking awful? Because I think at that point, maybe he was like, I don't want to necessarily abduct another girl because I don't know, but maybe he's like, I don't want to abduct another girl because like he's scared he's gonna get caught. The police interviewed him, blah blah blah. So he's like, fuck it, take it out on Karla. She's gonna take it. So you've seen the photos, but that's the blacked eyes.
And we can leave it to people to find these on their own. If
you don't want to put them up.
So
I mean,
it's a little graphic.
We'll think about it. Definitely not the Tammy autopsy photos, but maybe those ones. I don't know.
They're very easy to find.
Yeah, you just Google it. That's true. So these injuries were so severe that one of her eyes had almost come out of its socket, which is terrifying. Ew. And she had a broken rib, and her legs were so bruised that she could barely walk. So she was beat.
So it's like, what do you have to do to like have your eye come out of the
I think he was just like fucking hitting her with the flashlight.
But it's like, where, how do they?
Maybe like here?
Yeah.
I didn't fully, but it like almost.
Yeah, no, I know. And like, I know it's true. It's just, I don't know the like mechanisms for like, how that.
So awful. Like, imagine how scary that would be. Like, to be
terrifying.
Karla.
And you'd think you were going to die.
And it's your husband, the one person that you're supposed to like be safe with. So psychologically, that's got to fuck you up.
Yeah.
Not that she already wasn't extremely fucked up, but Karla still went back to work the next day, which I don't know if Paul tried to convince her not to or if he was sleeping in.
How could she even see or walk?
She was, well, you saw the photos. She went back to work. And that's where I think she was done with Paul.
Yeah, and she knew.
Because I think she was like, fuck
She knew
this.
they were suspicious.
Yeah, and if I show up like this, like, that's a cry for help. Yeah. I think at that point she was like, dude, like, he used to always beat her, but he drew the line at beating her on the face, and now he like went way beyond that line, and
nearly killed her. She's probably scared for her life.
Right. And he had like raped her and like tortured her with the strangling with the electrical cord. So I think she was just like, that I'm done. Like, this is where it has to end. So her coworker called her mom again, and this time was like, or I guess this time she called her mom directly and was like, come straight to the vet's office and get Karla. Like, you need to come get her right now. So Dorothy Homolka shows up. She's horrified, obviously, by Karla's face. But apparently Karla just tried to act casual and like nothing was really wrong. She took her out to lunch at McDonald's. Karla could barely walk because of the bruises. And she was like, no, I don't want to leave Paul. Like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. And her mom was just like, Karla, like, you obviously aren't fine. Like, you're far from fine. And I think from Karla's perspective, she was probably like, I really want to get away from Paul, but I don't want my parents to find out what I did to Tammy.
Yeah.
So I think
that's the whole crux of why she stays the whole time.
Yeah, she must be so torn.
She's been blackmailed.
Right. And
she has to admit to like having raped her sister and like been involved in many rapes and murders.
Yeah.
Like, she wants to leave the relationship. And at this point, I think it's probably like jail's probably better than the hell she's living in.
It could be, but she still doesn't want to admit, you know?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who like they're fine with even like they've accepted like I'm probably going to go to prison, but like I'm not going to admit it along the way. But you know that nobody's just going to allow it to happen.
Right.
So it's just like, okay, I'll just keep denying it, but like it's on my face.
Yeah, exactly. So she said, I want to go back to work. I want to go back home to Paul. And her mom let her go.
What?
Yeah, her mom let her go. But later in the day, she was like, okay, fuck this. And her and Lori, the middle sister, drove over to Port Dalhousie and basically dragged Karla, who was home alone at the time, out of the house.
How do you let somebody who looks like that?
Yeah, they let her go, which I think very interesting about the family. Yeah, like, I think that's
weird. The family
weird.
Really seems like they're just like really emotionally detached.
Yeah.
And I'm sure after like the death of their 15-year-old daughter, like things were probably even worse.
Right. It's very, like, there's a few more things about her family that come up, but it's very enigmatic to me. Like, I don't quite understand it. But so they drove her to the hospital. They're like, Karla, like, I know you don't want to leave, but like, we're dragging you. And Karla's like tiny. So they're like, we're getting you out of here. So January 5th, 1993, a doctor from the ER of the St. Catherine's General Hospital called the police to report what was the worst case of spousal abuse he had ever seen. Paul Bernardo, Karla's husband, beat her. Police go fucking pick up Paul Bernardo. Look what he did to his wife. Later that evening, Paul Bernardo was arrested. At the headquarters of the Niagara Police Station, he was interrogated, fingerprinted, photographed, and then given a charge for assault. The next morning, he appeared in court, and after consenting to show up at an upcoming hearing, he was released.
Oy.
So, released back into society. No surprise here, when he was released to go home, he was extremely angry. So first he called the Homolka's house. When they didn't want to talk to him, he showed up at Karla's mom's workplace and her sister's workplace, threatened them, and was like, tell me where fucking Karla is. But nobody would tell them where Karla was. Tell him where Karla was.
We're
not going to give you access to Karla. Like, we saw that you beat the shit out of her.
She's right over here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Paul.
She's been waiting for you.
Yeah. He also, this was described in detail in Lethal Marriage, he sat in his studio and recorded a super cringy message on a cassette tape about how lonely he was and how much he loved and missed Karla. And it was like, Karla, it's me and you against the world. Like, I miss you, Carly. Like, all this. It went on for pages of just his, like, you have no grounds for this, Paul. Like, you do not have any reason to deserve anyone's, not that you don't deserve anyone's love, I guess you don't,
you deserve nobody's sympathy.
And then he did this very typical narcissist thing where he was like, Karla, I'm gonna kill myself because, like, if I can't live without you, I can't live.
Yeah, they always do that.
They always do. And of course there was no signs that he ever tried to commit suicide.
It's like, okay, go for
just
it.
Do us all a favor, bro. But so anyways, just being self-indulgent. So Paul couldn't find Karla because she had moved in with her aunt and uncle in Brampton, which is a city west of Toronto. St. Catharines in Port Dalhousie, which is part of St. Catharines were east of Toronto. So she had moved to
The opposite side.
the opposite side. And as far as her aunt and uncle knew, they were just helping their innocent niece seek refuge from her abusive husband. So they were like sheltering her. Well, into the new year, into January, Karla's injuries were starting to heal and her mood was improving as well. In a diary she kept at the time, she describes feeling free after leaving Paul, saying that she wasn't as frightened of him coming to kill her like he'd always threatened because he didn't know where to find her in Brampton, and because she knew he had a lot to lose. So she kind of felt like, I'm free finally, and
he's under the eyes of the police.
Yeah, and I'm sure her mood's got to be way up. Like before the crash of realizing the trauma and like the guilt of what she's done, she's in that like
she's like feeling relief
honeymoon phase of like, I'm away from him. So as her bruises started to fade, her uncle and aunt persuaded her, go out and have some fun at a local nightclub with some friends. So there, and this is still early January or mid-January, there she met a man named Jim Hutton, who she started a new relationship with. So she's like dating this new guy, moving on from Paul, like
imagine like
him.
Going out into normal society and like, you know, starting a new relationship, knowing what you've just done.
It's gotta be. Yeah, I'm sure she was
so
just
weird.
in denial. Like that's what it kind of sounds like, a very much like sweep under the rug type of situation where she's just like, I'm free now. I was abused by Paul. Yeah, aunt and uncle who are giving me sympathy. That's what happened.
Yeah,
and just
being
like
I was a complete victim.
Yeah, and just not wanting to face like.
And like she definitely was a victim. Not saying she's not, but like.
Yeah, like that beating, the photos, like she was a fucking victim. There's no way that she consented to that. I don't think there's any way.
Hell no.
Yeah. So in late January, while Karla was trying to move on from Paul, and Paul was just like wallowing in his misery and rage, a detective from the sexual assault squad at the Metropolitan Police headquarters in Toronto got a call from their crime lab. Over 2 years earlier, the lab had received 224 fluid samples from suspects. I can't talk. In the Scarborough
It's
rapist
late,
case.
y'all.
Yeah. I'm trying my best.
Just saying. I just said y'all, so.
Okay, so the results were in, and one man, so this was late January 1993. Paul's DNA had gone in November 1990, so over 3 years later, or I guess over 2 years. I guess that's how long they had. 2 years was when they'd gotten all the samples, but it was 3 years. So now the results were in, and one man was forensically connected to being the Scarborough rapist. It was the cheerful, unassuming accountant they had interviewed 3 years ago. I wrote 2. I think it's 3. Paul Bernardo.
2 to 3.
Yeah. So Paul Bernardo was forensically identified as the Scarborough rapist.
Finally.
At this point, because Paul had been charged in the Niagara region for assault, and the Metropolitan Toronto Police Force had now gotten him like
as a Scarborough
locked in as the Scarborough rapist. So the police forces got together. The Toronto police told the Niagara force that Paul Bernardo, who's living within their jurisdiction, was a major sexual deviant. They're like, this guy, we just realized, is a serial rapist, and he's living in your jurisdiction.
And they're like, hey, yeah, he just beat his wife.
Yeah, and the officers from Niagara were like, hey, I wonder if this suspect from the Scarborough rapist crimes could be the same person who murdered Leslie and Kristen. So they weren't sure because he didn't fit the profile that the FBI had given to Project Green Ribbon, which was a blue-collar worker, and he was a quote-unquote accountant, as he had told the Toronto police.
Which was just a straight up lie.
Yeah, he had been at one point. Like when he met Karla, he was working for Price Waterhouse, which is an accounting firm, but then he got unemployed and was smuggling cigarettes. But also, Paul drove a Nissan, not a Camaro, so that they were like, could it be him? He doesn't drive a Camaro, which is like ridiculous. But either way, the Niagara police were on board to investigate Paul, as well as his wife, as a potential accomplice, because they're like, this guy's got an accomplice. Millions of dollars had been spent on the investigation. Thousands of Camaros had been searched. Hundreds of men had been interviewed as suspects. It was a very high priority case. So when they finally had a clear potential like suspect, they were gonna fucking move and make that a very big priority. So the Toronto police put Paul under surveillance because they had very obvious reason to believe he was a Scarborough rapist, DNA. And in the meantime, a detective from the Niagara police tracked down Karla's location via her parents. And they kind of made it seem like, hey, we want to talk to Karla about Paul. So the parents were like, yeah, here's where she is. So the police called Karla for an interview, and she assumed okay, they want to ask questions about Paul's assault. Early in February of 1993, 4 police officers showed up at Karla's aunt and uncle's apartment. And as soon as one of the officers identified himself as belonging to Project Green Ribbon, Karla kind of knew what was up.
Yeah.
So everyone acted really casual. The police officers were like, oh, Karla, we're so sorry. Like, you look like you've been through so much with Paul. She still had signs of bruising. She kind of was walking with a limp, and they were like really sympathetic towards her. And Karla was like, yeah, I've been abused. Like, she was playing into it too. They started asking her questions about Paul. So they asked, how does he make money? Karla said, he's self-employed as an accountant. They said, is he involved in any criminal activity? She said, no. They said, do you guys have any haircutting equipment in the house? And she's like, yeah, because Kristen's hair was cut. So she's like, why would you ask that? I don't know. But obviously she knew. They asked if she knew anything about the Scarborough rapist. She said she didn't. They asked if Paul was sexually violent, which she didn't. She said, I don't know. Like, she was like, apparently she got very shy, but it wasn't because she was shy about it. It was because she was like, oh, I don't want to implicate him. So Karla said no to everything they asked. And when they said, Karla, do you know why we're asking you these questions? Like, they'd say, do you know where the Holy Cross Catholic School is? Like, they were asking her all these questions. And she was like, I don't know. Why are you asking me these questions? Just like played dumb. So the police left, and it was late into the night. They'd questioned her for a long time. When the police left, Karla cracked. She told her aunt about Leslie and Kristen's abductions, rapes, and murders. Although, from what I understand, she downplayed her role and said Paul had forced her to be an accomplice. And I will note, she did not admit anything about Tammy at this point.
Yeah.
So, yeah. In the morning, Karla's aunt told her uncle about their niece's confession, and they were like, she's got a lawyer up. Like, that was their basic response. So Karla arranged to meet with George Walker, a criminal counselor from Niagara Falls. I'm going to get into everything that happened with Karla in the next episode, with everything with her lawyer. But for now, let me tell you about what happened to Paul. After putting Paul under surveillance, so the Toronto police are watching him, and, you know, he's creeping around, but they're not catching him doing anything. So they decided that they're going to do their takedown of him on Wednesday, February 17th, 1993. Paul was at home, and his phone rang. It was someone trying to sell him a magazine subscription. He wasn't interested, but the guy kept him on the phone, and he's like trying to get off the phone. And the next thing he knew, someone knocked on the front door. So he got off the phone, or he like put down the phone, opened the door, and a man immediately showed him a badge and then shoved him face first against a wall.
Good.
Yeah. Another officer pointed a gun at his head while the first officer handcuffed him. The police then went over and hung up the phone because the telemarketer was really a police officer who was distracting Paul while the cops surrounded his house. Before reading Paul, yeah, just get him, just fucking trap him. Before reading Paul his rights, the police told him that they had a warrant for his arrest for the Scarborough rapes. Paul was crying when he was escorted to the police car, like, oh, you can show emotion, sir? Yeah.
I wonder if he like forced those tears.
Oh, God, who knows? I don't know.
Everything about him is just fake.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe he was upset. And maybe he was like...
Maybe he was upset that he was being
caught. Or maybe he was just upset because he's like, you know, a hurt child on the inside. But not an excuse, but, you know. And obviously I had to include this part. He was like, guys, what about my dog? Is someone going to be looking after Buddy? And the officer was like, there's a Humane Society car right there. So animal control picked up poor Buddy, and I don't know what happened to him.
Yeah, that's why, like, it's not good, like, that poor dog. Like,
yeah, I know.
And he was just left alone with Paul. Paul probably...
Yeah.
Do you think Paul was feeding him properly and taking him outside? I don't know.
That's the interesting thing. It seems like... I think there was times where, like, Paul got pissed at the dog, but it seems like they were, like, kind of good dog owners. Like, in some of it was like, Karla woke up early to walk Buddy. It's like, you guys can do this, but you can't function, like... I don't know. Anyways, I guess the police knew that he had the dog, and they prearranged the dog to be picked up.
What about the iguana?
Yeah, I don't know about the iguana. I do wonder what happened to Spike.
Poor Spike.
I know. Poor Buddy, poor Spike. They deserve better. So Paul, and sorry, I'm joking when I say that about the animals. It's totally a joke. Obviously, like the actual victims of this case are... No,
but the animals too, like...
Yeah, the animals too. But
they were owned by Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Like, that's shitty.
I love animals, and like I love talking about animals, so I'm just using it as an excuse to talk about animals. But obviously I know that's not what's important in this case. It's a joke.
It's a side note.
So Paul was to appear in court the following morning for the accused of the Scarborough rapes. And that's where I'm going to leave things at for today, because next time I want to tell you about his trial, everything that happened with Karla with her lawyer, the aftermath, like the sentences, and where they are now, because they're both still alive. So that's going to be next time. What do you think so far?
That is, I'm really excited for the next episode because
it's very interesting what happens next.
And it's so like, it's satisfying to like listen to, first of all that horrible shit they did, and then just to hear like
you got
what happened.
You're good. Yeah, because there's so many cases where, well,
I know.
Yeah, but there's so many cases where it's like, you know, either people get away from like, was it Israel Keys committed suicide?
Yeah.
We had
Herb.
Like there's like a lot of people who don't get brought to justice. And at the very least, Paul will be showing up in court. We know that much. But there's so much, because both Paul and Karla are still alive. And it's now 2021 at the time of this recording.
Yeah.
So that's been like 28 years in the meantime. So this was 5 years, essentially, the time that they knew each other. So there's a lot more to talk about, a lot more interesting, like fucked up shit happens. So we're going to save that for part 4. But yeah, that's part 3. Paul Bernardo, Karla Homolka.
Yeah, that's been very intense.
Yeah, that's a good word for it.
I'm going to have a hard time driving home by myself.
Check your back seat.
Yeah, I will.
Every time. Every time. Yeah. And honestly, I left a lot of details out.
No, there's so much, and especially because this case is so publicized. Like there's literally so much about it. But it's all wrapped up. So at least like, I guess in some ways you can verify what's true and what's not. But also it's a lot of like he said, she said.
Right. And I'll get more into that after, because obviously the two of them are going to be facing legal repercussions. And they turn on each other, obviously. Yeah. And like I did also say, Paul and potentially Karla have been accused of some other crimes, which maybe I will list in the next part. But because it's unknown, I feel like, you know, maybe I won't include them. I'll focus on including what we know as much as possible. But yeah, they're insane people, obviously. I think it's a really, like, in a terrifying way, a very interesting dynamic between the two of them.
I will say I do really agree with you that like Paul is like probably like 100 times worse than Karla.
Yeah.
And I have seen no evidence that if she never met him, she would be doing the same thing.
Right. Or that she was seeking out a partner to commit murders.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that way.
I don't see any evidence for that.
Right. But I think it's pretty obvious that Karla didn't care about, not that she didn't care about her sister, but she was at the very least very negligent with her sister's life. And maybe it was,
I do buy that she like wanted to kill her sister.
It's possible. I don't know if she did or she didn't. I wonder if maybe she felt like, I mean, I don't think this is the case, but maybe she felt like, I'm protecting Tammy from Paul. Like, I don't know.
She could have twisted it however she wanted to twist it in her head to make it make sense.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think she was jealous of Tammy and didn't want her there anymore.
I wonder that. And I don't know if it was like she just like lost her mind completely from being abused, but it didn't really seem like his abuse was so severe until after they moved out together.
I think he was definitely super abusive and she was a victim, but I also think she was very selfish.
Yeah. And I think
it's that's like the underlying, I think that's an underlying like part of her personality, which allowed her to do what she did.
Yeah. Because I would assume for myself, I strongly believe that no matter what situation I would be in, like how bad of a person I was with, I would never do something like that.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous to think that
I know I can't
say
like, that for sure, obviously, but
I just think that looking at that situation, I think that's a situation that I would have gotten out of quicker.
Yeah.
Like I think
we'd like to think that we would have.
I think based on my own past and my own like previous relationships, I think that if somebody started to abuse me like that, and
you'd
mostly
look for a way out.
And mostly because like I do have a very strong support system.
Right.
I have like I was raised to like never let people treat me like that.
Right.
And I think like I've been in like, you know, I've been with people who are like kind of shitty but not abusive in any way, shape, or form. But I think I was raised with a toolkit to allow me to recognize abusive behavior and not allow it.
Which we don't know if Karla was or she was.
I don't think she was. Yeah. It doesn't look like she was.
It doesn't seem like it.
So it's different.
Yeah. So that's part 3. Get ready for part 4 next week. We're out of the
extreme, disturbing
Yeah, like the really, really
graphic
traumatic,
stuff.
horrible stuff is done. We're going to talk. I mean, we will obviously like rehash it throughout the trial and everything, but the next part is going to be kind of like the legal aspect, and
that's my favorite stuff to talk about.
It's really interesting, and it's specifically everything that happened with them is extremely fascinating, and there's a ton there. So we will get into that next week. In the meantime, let us know what you thought. We'd love to hear your feedback. I'm sure, like we said last time, I'm sure a lot of people know about this case. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on it, whether it's about the case in general or about the way that I presented the case. Look, we'd love to hear any feedback. So Instagram is like one of our number one channels. That's at Who's Knocking Podcast. But you can also send us an email to hello@whosknockingpodcast.com. If you feel inclined, you can follow us on Twitter at Who's Knocking Pod.
We'll get there.
We'll get there eventually. And we would definitely appreciate if you want to rate or review us on iTunes. That helps us out. And follow on iTunes or Spotify. I think that's all the things. All of that stuff.
Yeah. But we're just so happy to have you. And if you've listened all the way to now, thank you so much.
Yes. We appreciate you joining in our conversations, because we'd be talking about this anyways, but now we do it with you guys here too. So that's all for right now, and stay safe out there, because you never know who's knocking.
This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.